Hey, welcome to those who are online. We are excited to share with you today our legislative updates for this session from MVLS. I am going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we will kick off the presentation. Let's make sure I'm in slideshow mode here. Okay, for my co-presenters, because you're the only ones I can see. Can you see the presentation? Okay, great. All right, so we are going to hopefully shortly be joined by Stephen Kopp in our Tangled Title program and also attorney. Also on this webinar, you have myself. I'm our deputy director at MVLS. You have Heather Hyman, our Human Trafficking Prevention Program manager, Chris Sweeney, our Workforce Development Project manager, Stephen Coppin, Tangled Title Program attorney, John Hart, our Low Income Tax Clinic director. So we are very excited to talk to you today about specifically the legislation that we were following this session and working on, but also really, how it impacts our clients. And so we've prepared a PowerPoint for you with references to the legislation that you can go back and look at. But we really want this presentation to be one where you learn how these things are impacting the lives of MVLS clients. So we'll be focused on that as well. I'm going to kick us off, and then I will turn it over to some of my colleagues to speak more specifically about some of these areas we're going to be talking about. But just to kind of give a broad overview of what MVLS does for anyone who might be newer to us, there are 6 areas of law that MVLS works in, and these are family law, housing, consumer, criminal record relief, tax, and estate planning and administration. So those are the areas we're going to be focusing on today when we talk about our legislative updates. And with that, I am going to go ahead and actually let me just say one more thing, which is at the end of the presentation, I'll speak a bit more about how you can get involved with MVLS if you're joining us for the first time. But with that, I will turn it over to Chris Sweeney to talk a bit about criminal record relief.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Again, Chris Sweeney. I'm one of the staff attorneys here, and I manage the Workforce Development Project. Most of the legislation that we follow through that project has to do with criminal record expungement, which is obviously a very popular area of law for our clients in this project who are in job training because of the fact that criminal records are a major barrier to employment, housing, and all other sorts of things that can increase life stability. So we're pretty heavily involved with advocacy around expungement issues every year in Annapolis. And there's a lot of things that if you're familiar with the overall landscape of expungement, law and legislation should be pretty familiar to you in terms of what's gotten introduced over the years. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of updates on bills that actually passed this year. However, we do like to go over some of the trends and some of the concepts that are being pushed in Annapolis by advocates and lawmakers. Even if they didn't pass this year, there's a lot of important things that are ongoing projects to get signed into law, hopefully sometime in the future. So on the left-hand column, there's a lot of things that we think are important trends to watch in terms of expungement advocacy. And though those bills did not pass, I'll just kind of go over a brief summary of what those things were and why they matter. So automatic expungement, there was an automatic expungement bill that actually passed in 2021. However, it only applies to cases that happen after the law went into effect. So anything that happened before 2021 is not eligible for automatic expungement. There was a bill introduced this year, and I think it will be introduced again next year to increase the availability of automatic expungement, basically to go completely retroactively and apply to any case that would be eligible, and even really increase the eligibility in the sense of the current automatic expungement applies only to basically dropped charges. This would apply to really anything that would be eligible under the expungement statute at all, more or less. That's how broad in scope this automatic expungement bill was. So that's something that's going to be an ongoing battle for expungement advocates, and that may be something that takes quite a while to actually get passed. But the ball is rolling on that, and we're going to be supporting those efforts going forward, and we'll see where we end up. Next is the unit rule. If you're familiar with expungement, you know that in Maryland, the unit rule is something that really has been a major barrier to those who practice expungement and those who have records and seeking to get things expunged. And it basically means that if you have one ineligible charge within your set of charges in a single case, that entire case is locked in and cannot be expunged. There's a lot of things proposed to get around that technically and legally in writing that into law. Unfortunately, we didn't get there this year, but that's really probably the top item on expungement advocates' want list, is to get rid of the unit rule. So we'll keep fighting on that one. Good cause is something that's been introduced over the years. Unfortunately, did not pass again. That would basically be increasing judicial discretion in granting expungements for things that may not be on paper eligible in the actual language of the statute. And then finally, at the Abhishek appellate case, which my colleague Heather is going to talk about as well in a little more detail, this is also right at the top of the list in terms of what we want to see fixed. Basically, there was an appellate case that made it so that if someone violated their probation, they basically locks them in to be ineligible for expungement permanently. So things that, misdemeanors, minor offenses that would be eligible for expungement are really kind of the meat of expungement and what was written into the law. And really the spirit of the expungement law in Maryland overall is to be able to provide a second chance for, mostly minor offenses, but really anything that's eligible. Now, about half of cases that would be eligible and should be eligible under our statute are not eligible because the person violated probation, and the violation can be as small as you can imagine. It can be maybe the defendant moved and didn't notify the judge that they had a new address. That could be a violation, something like that. And depending on the exact outcome of the violation, it basically, if the person gets their probation terminated and resentenced, that locks you in for forever. You can't expunge that case anymore. So that's a big thing that we are going to be coming back every year and to the legislature until we can get that fixed. That's a major barrier to our clients and anyone with a criminal record who would otherwise be eligible for expungement. So on the side of some good news, I will share with you a bill that did pass. There was a bill that primarily had to do with requirements around DWI penalties and the interlock system and the fallout from someone getting a DUI conviction or charge. At the last minute, there was an amendment to this bill that actually put in provisions for expungement of DWI or DUI when the defendant receives probation before judgment. If you're familiar with expungement in Maryland, you know that you can pretty much always expunge a PBJ. But if the charge you received was DUI or DWI, then you can't. That's the one major outlier in terms of the entire world of expunging what we would consider non-convictions, where the charge actually affects whether or not you can expunge it. And this is just an outlier that's existed in the statute for many years. There's been a lot of advocacy around just basically the idea of second chances, and let's see if there's a path for people to move on who have this on their record, because it still obviously affects a lot of people. Basically, when this goes into effect, I believe October 1st, you will be able to get an expungement for the charge of driving while intoxicated or driving under the influence. And if the outcome was probation before judgment, the sort of prerequisites are: one, it only applies if the substance you were influenced by was alcohol. It doesn't apply to DUIs for any other sort of intoxicant. You have to wait 15 years from the date that you're discharged from probation. And of course, there is still the subsequent conviction rule, which applies to any PBJ anyway. So if you get convicted of anything else within that waiting period, you can expunge that case. And additional PBJs on DWI are also going to count as a subsequent case that would block. So that's different than other types of PBJs. Finally, the way the statute is laid out here, there's sort of a separate offenses codified in the DUI statute, where basically if you get 2 or more offenses, it's kind of it's separate offense where fines increase, potential penalties increase. So basically those are not eligible. So you can basically, my reading of the statute is you could max out at 2 DUI PBJ expungements, and then you'd be in a different territory where if you had a third one or more, you would likely have been charged with this other statute, which is not listed as being singled out for expungement. So that's it in terms of what I have to share about expungement legislation updates. And I think I'll be turning it over to Heather to talk more about probably some expungement related stuff.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, it's a good segue over from Chris's workforce development project to the human trafficking prevention project in our human trafficking prevention work here at MVLS. Again, my name is Heather Hyman. I'm a staff attorney here, and I manage the HTPP project, which is a partnership. MVLS has been partnering with the nonprofit, the Human Trafficking Prevention Project, for over, I believe, 9 years now, to advocate for individuals who may identify as survivors of human trafficking, individuals who trade sex for any reason. And we also work with populations who are put at high risk of future exploitation due to numerous factors such as past abuse and trauma, substance use, housing instability, and things of that nature. Just segueing from Chris's slide, we're heavily involved with their work advocating for improvements to Maryland's expungement laws. They also just critically impact our clients. The core of the work that we do at the Human Trafficking Prevention Project with our partners and here at MVLS is around criminal record relief. That's how the project got started. And these trip-ups, these barriers that are still part of Maryland's expungement and criminal record landscape can really make things challenging for survivors and to other people who are just trying to find a stable place to live, a safe place to live, a secure job. And so this is at the heart of the advocacy that we do as well. Chris already did a great summary of the Abhishek fix that we were hoping to get passed this year. The HTPP and MVLS actually partnered around some testimony. There was a great article written in the SBA Bar Journal about this issue that you can look at if you want to get a little bit more in-depth analysis about it. But just the takeaway from the HTPP side, our clients are often dealing with just extremely complex trauma, a long-term recovery from exploitative situations. And it can be really, really challenging to kind kind of navigate all of the systems when you're involved with the criminal legal system. And as Chris gave a few, great examples, like if you miss updating an address, we see clients who failed a drug test, who, just missed a meeting, so they couldn't get transportation to a meeting with their probation officer, they couldn't get childcare. It can all lead to that violation that is now preventing them due to the court decision in Re-Abhishek from being able to expunge records that would otherwise be expungible. We have clients that kind of tracking their cases that have not been able to clear their record or address cases. They have cases that are blocking other things that might be otherwise expungible due to this judgment by the courts. So we're also prioritizing this as a major thing that we'll need to hopefully have continued advocacy next year, because we really see it continuing to impact our clients. Going to the next slide. With our work with human trafficking prevention here at MVLS, it's also kind of a mixed bag of things that we saw with the legislative session this year. The way that we do things with our specific project is we'll kind of look, what will MVLS be offering testimony on, what will the HTPP be offering testimony on, where can we support each other, where can we kind of divide and get our voices and our clients' voices heard around a lot of different issues. I do like to always dispel the myth that human trafficking is occurring like in shadowy corners and with people getting kidnapped, all the way Hollywood usually frames the issue. That's not what we see with most of our clients. The clients that we work with are usually grappling with histories of abuse, histories of family instability, systemic and institutional racism, poverty, other issues that make them incredibly vulnerable to future exploitation and or they've experienced exploitation. So when we look at what legislation we want to be commenting on, supporting, fighting against, we try to take that very holistic picture. And sometimes it's a little bit outside of the realm of what MVLS is traditionally advocating for. And you can see that reflected in the list that's on the slide right here. MVLS has been working with the Baltimore Harm Reduction Coalition to try and support their push to decriminalize possession of drug paraphernalia. That's a common arrest that we see many of our clients grappling with, and conviction we see our clients grappling with. We've also been supporting legislation to establish overdose prevention sites throughout the state of Maryland, because that's something that we believe, again, as part of our harm reduction model, would be very helpful to many of our clients as they're kind of grappling with substance use, sometimes using substances to deal with the trauma that they've experienced. So we've been supporting that. And then there was also a specific bill that we were hoping to see pass this year, and it was a repeal of the criminalization of transfer of HIV. This is a kind of archaic bill from the 80s, or law from the 80s, that was really used to discriminate against the LGBTQIA+ community. And it's, again, something that we've seen clients of ours they've been arrested for, convicted of in the past. And so we were hoping that these laws, again, touching on a lot of aspects of our clients' lives, would all be moving forward, but unfortunately, none of them passed out of committee this year. And there's a lot of great coalition partners that we've had that have taken the lead on advocacy with these different pieces of legislation. We did have some successes this year. MVLS and the HTPP are part of the wider Maryland Human Trafficking Task Force, especially the Victim Services Committee and the Legislative Subcommittee. And there was a great bill that enhanced protections for children who might be the victims of labor trafficking. Actually, I have a whole slide in a different section because it's a little bit more in the family law, child in need of assistance services category. So I'll be talking about that a little bit more later, but that was a priority for the Maryland task force. At MVLS and the HTPP, we are not working with minors very often, but of course, anything we can do to intervene in early years is going to be beneficial to clients not needing our services down the road. We also were excited to see that a bill was passed ensuring that gender affirming healthcare is going to be fall into the category of legally protected healthcare here in Maryland, just giving additional protections to providers, to those seeking these types of services. We work with a lot of transgender folks at the HTPP, and we want to be sure that as part of, our support for their kind of holistic recovery, that they can access not only legal services, but medical services, other types of supports as they're on their journey. And then there was also an exciting bill that passed. It is a kind of a redoing of the victims' compensation process here in Maryland, which historically there's this money that's available to victims of crimes, to their families. And historically it's been incredibly hard to access. There's a lot of loopholes to go through, a lot of bureaucracy. And so this bill is trying to make it a little bit easier for victims of crime to be able to access these compensation funds, for their families to access these compensation funds. And so that was an exciting thing to see move this year. And with that, I think I will hand it over now to my colleague, John. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Heather.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. So this legislative session actually was a pretty good one for our tax program. We collaborated with the comptroller on a number of different bills, and generally speaking, the comptroller's bills this session were beneficial to our client, and they virtually all passed. So this is going to be kind of an upbeat section, thankfully. So the first one, which is very directly connected to us, is House Bill 451, Tax Assistance for Low-Income Marylanders Funding. This was passed, and it both fixed a problem where the state funding our tax clinic gets was sort of set to sunset after a number of years. This actually made it permanent. And even better, it actually increases state funding to all three of the LITCs in Maryland. So that includes us at MVLS, but then also the University of Maryland and the University of Baltimore LITCs, who are run by tax professors and their law professors and their law students, also get this funding. So we were previously getting, I believe, around $50,000 a year, and that has been increased to, I believe, $166,000 a year. So it's quite a significant increase. So I'm excited to see if that, lets us potentially expand our operations, maybe hire someone, which would really, I think, benefit our clinic and the amount of people we can help. That same bill also increases funding to the Maryland Cash Campaign, which is Baltimore and I believe the state's largest Vita site provider. And Vita sites are, these organizations where people who need to get their taxes done can go, and if during tax season, and if they make less than $60,000 a year, there are actually tax professionals there who can help them file their taxes for free. That is a really, really useful public service that they give. It's something that we can't do at our clinic ourselves. And it often, going to a Vita site can, or a Vita site, I forget which way they want us to pronounce it, can sort of head off tax problems before they even begin. So I'm also very happy to see there's additional funding for that. Another bill that we were supporting, we actually offered testimony in support of, is the Stop Scam Preparers Act. A lot of clients we get come to our door because they have gone to a less than trustworthy tax preparer, or maybe an incompetent tax preparer with no real qualifications. And they end up, applying for credits that the taxpayer isn't actually qualified for, and then they end up having to pay it back, which is a huge burden for them. So this bill, it doesn't revolutionize the sort of tax preparer qualification system in Maryland, but it does offer a pretty big fix, where essentially it creates this code of ethics via the State Board of Individual Tax Preparers, which is an organization that licenses all tax preparers who aren't already an enrolled agent or a CPA or an attorney. And then also sort of linking together the State Board of Individual Tax Preparers and the comptroller's office when it comes to enforcement. So if one office sees an evidence of a violation of this code of ethics, or that there's been a scam perpetrated, They will now finally communicate with one another so that the organization that oversees tax preparers can coordinate with the Comptroller's Office, who is actually the organization that receives tax returns, Maryland tax returns, which can be a really big benefit by letting them sort of cut off these fraudulent businesses' ability to operate on a large scale. And I think, next slide, yeah. The other bill, which we didn't offer testimony in support of, but we did actually coordinate with the Comptroller's Office on sort of the parameters of, to an extent, is the new electronic tax and filing requirements and fee return filing requirements, which is related. So that was passed this session. It sets a deadline for 2027, first of all, that requires businesses with over 15 employees to file most tax returns electronically. We don't really represent businesses, so that doesn't affect our clients very much. But what will affect them eventually is beginning in 2030, all tax returns are going to be expected to be filed electronically in Maryland. Now, this used to, when this bill first came to us, there really weren't many exceptions to it. But as you can see on the right side of the screen there were multiple exceptions added, which I think are really helpful. When the bill was the first draft we saw, there was actually no exception for like the blind who can't use the comptroller's computer system at all. So now they accept, anybody with a disability, not obligated to file online. Religious beliefs, like if someone is Amish, and they're not willing to use a computer, they don't have to file electronically. Other circumstances where they've demonstrated special need. And importantly for our clients, if they're 65 or older, or they have income less than $200,000 a year, which is basically all of our clients, if you put those two requirements together, especially the income requirement, they will not be required to file electronically, even past 2030. I think that's good, because the existing Maryland comptroller system for filing online is kind of terrible. And they're in the process of revamping that slowly. So the long deadline for actually implementing this was sort of very necessary. So even though the exceptions encompass most of our clients, I think it will hopefully make the Maryland processing times go down. And then finally, related to the tax preparers issue that I was speaking with earlier, it will prevent tax preparers from tacking on additional electronic filing fees once electronic filing is mandatory. So within the Maryland system, so that's good. I think those are the three major tax bills that were advanced this year, and they all passed.
Thanks, John. Yeah, this issue of just government agencies moving to all electronic applications is an interesting one, because I think it streamlines things for them, and it it helps them collect better data probably, but we have seen across the board that a lot of our clients just are not able to access these online applications. So I'm glad that they took your feedback on that and took that into account, and made some exceptions and carve-outs. So with that, I am going to do an overview of housing and consumer. We at MVLS do usually are involved in some level of housing and consumer work. Every session. We have one of the main challenges that our clients face is just financial instability, which has often been created by various systems that are kind of interacting in their lives. Many of our clients come from difficult backgrounds where their family has been in poverty. Many are facing structural barriers to housing, to education. I think, some of my colleagues have spoken a bit about these issues before, but, in the consumer area, particularly, the laws really do not favor low income people. In fact, they're written, to kind of extract more money from those who are already struggling. And that is, why we do find it important to be involved in some of these housing and consumer issues. So one of them was one of the bills that was introduced this session was about preventing lease lock insurance. This is an insurance product that basically tenants, it's billed that tenants would pay it in alternative to a security deposit, but the tenants, it ends up being quite expensive and they don't get the money back. Like you get a security deposit back typically when you move out of a property. And so we really feel like this would be a product that would help landlords and hurt tenants. Unfortunately, the bill to prevent it did not pass. But that is, something that we're keeping an eye out. It's a product that's been in other markets in other states and is now kind of starting to come into Maryland now more. We also saw HB 246, which had to do with some of the products that mimic payday loans, another lending product that really kind of targets low-income clients that are living paycheck to paycheck. And this unfortunately also did not pass. So those are both protections that we would have liked to see pass that did not pass. Moving on more into kind of the housing arena, there was a foreclosure bill that was being discussed by a lot of different housing advocates and government agencies, as well as the foreclosure bar, which would have made a number of reforms to the foreclosure system. And that bill didn't really get very far in session at all. But the reason that I'm mentioning it is I do believe there's going to be some kind of push for a comprehensive foreclosure overhaul next session that is already being discussed about right now. So I don't know exactly what it'll look like. One of the issues that this bill targeted was these zombie second mortgages, which are these mortgages that are kind of like second mortgages that are kind of hanging out there on these properties that people don't even know are there, and then they get foreclosed upon, and it's kind of a shock to our homeowners. So I think that's something that's going to come back around. There's a lot of different issues that were being discussed, and we'll see what next year brings in the terms of the foreclosure bill landscape. Tax sale. Tax sale is an issue where we, I think, work on a bill pretty much every year. It is a very predatory system, the tax sale system, that really impacts the most vulnerable homeowners in the state of Maryland. Most of our clients are older adults. I think over 30% of them identify as being people who have a disability. Over 80% of them are Black. So it is not a issue that impacts everybody equally. It really impacts really the most vulnerable part of our population, especially in Baltimore City. And a couple years ago, MVLS and some other advocates were successful in getting a bill passed that took water bills out of tax sale. And I won't go too far into the background of that, but really there had been a lot of issues with misbilling and inaccurate water bills in Baltimore City particularly. And we were very concerned that people were going into tax sale for water bills that they may not have even owed. And at that time, the legislature made the decision to take water bills out of tax sale. There is now a push to get water bills put back into tax sale. And we are obviously very concerned about that and how that would impact our clients. So this was actually a bill, HB 243, that we originally supported, and then they put in at the last minute this language about adding water bills back into tax sale, and MVLS, as well as the other advocates involved in the bill, actually ended up opposing the bill at that point in time. So it was a huge victory for us that this bill was killed, and I hope that if it comes back next year, it comes back in a format that has protections for homeowners and not the negative aspects that we were so concerned about. The one little good piece of something that was passed was related to the homeowner's property tax credit. There was a bill that was passed that people can attest to their income and they don't have to prove what their income is to get this credit by filing taxes. The reason that this is relevant is a lot of our clients are of such a low income that they aren't even required to file taxes, but they were not able to easily get some of the credits that they're entitled to because the credits require you to show proof of a tax return. And so clients were getting denied some of these credits that they should have been easily able to get. And just property tax credits are a huge stabilizing factor for our clients to be able to stay in their house and afford their taxes every year, especially those are older adults and no longer have a mortgage. A lot of times what will happen is they don't have a mortgage, they're not making a payment each month, and then $2,500 of property taxes will hit them all at once. And it's like you're supposed to come up with this lump sum. And that's very challenging for a lot of our clients whose monthly income can be, you know, $700 a month or something of that nature. We reform around property tax credits has been important for our clients. There was another bill about property tax credits that I won't go into as much, but it didn't pass. Basically the income limits for that particular tax credit have not been raised for many years, and based on, you know, cost of living and inflation and everything, we feel like they should be raised. This is actually a bill that's been introduced several times now. There was a bill related to water governance that we've been quite involved in, HB 1509, which did pass. All this bill does is create a task force. So we're not legally, a task force was created. No other changes were made. But the reason that we're following this so closely is that it really comes out of this effort to potentially privatize Baltimore's water system. And at the very least kind of combine Baltimore City's water system with Baltimore County's water system and create like a regional system. And we just want to make sure that this is being done in a way that takes into account the considerations of our clients, and especially is looking at equity considerations and not just kind of that pushed last year. They were really trying to push through this one model very quickly that we didn't think really took the time to look at like the impact on our clients who are often already struggling to pay for water. And so we're happy with this bill having passed. It's going to be a 3-year work group to really look more in depth at all of these issues that are impacting our clients around water. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen Kopp.
Thanks, Margaret. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen Coppin. I'm a staff attorney, and I work on our Tangle Title project, which includes our estate planning and estate administration legal issues. We work on these issues because it's really important for our clients to do their proper estate planning and make sure that whatever intergenerational wealth that they have is passed on the way that they would like it to. And then we also help people resolve those issues when it doesn't become as straightforward, when there becomes an issue of a tangle title on a house or some other issue after the fact. So our tangle title project and our estate planning and administration issue has some overlap with our housing issues, which we might see as we get into my slides. But we also have some issues that we were very specifically interested in this legislative session. And so with that, the first one that we were really interested in was the clean lien sheet requirement. So currently, the current clean lien sheet requirement, or at least the requirement before this session, requires that public taxes and charges were to be paid prior to the transfer of property. So we saw that this affected many of our clients because they would get to the final step in estate administration, but due to their property taxes being owed, or maybe overdue overdue bills of some sort were straining their access to their largest asset, their home. And it was stopping them from completing the final step of the estate administration and actually transferring that property to the next person in line. And so we were seeing that it's one of those issues that touches other issues and causes problems, especially when conjoined with the applicability of tax credits and other issues of the sort. So We specifically were doing advocacy on this because we believe that even without this clean lien sheet requirement, the taxes are still able to be collected. And it's better to let these families start leveraging this large asset of the home and make sure that the property that they're already taking care of, they should be getting the full benefit of. So actually, the legislature passed a law, HB 54, which is very helpful. It's going to allow Marylanders to enter payment plans to transfer the property. So when they enter into that payment plan, then they'll actually be able to transfer the property to the next person using a deed. So the law will take effect on July 1st, but we are still waiting to hear what the timeline for implementation will be, because that implementation of that policy will take the setup of these payment plans, the actual the infrastructure to run these payment plans hasn't been determined specifically. So we're still waiting to see the actual timeline of implementation, but the law takes effect on July 1st. And then we have some other estates issues which MVLS didn't get involved with advocacy-wise, but are important for general estate planning attorneys and estate administration issues. One bill limited the definition of interested persons, the people who might be interested in an estate, by clarifying that parties whose interests have lapsed, people whose gifts have already been given, people who might have had a claim, but the claim has been resolved. It clarified that those parties were no longer considered interested persons at a certain point. And then the second limits the amount of people who can object to the appointment of a personal representative, limiting the class to all interested persons or unpaid claimants. Initially, before, it was anybody could object. So it actually kind of limits the standing there for those objections. Next slide, please. Some other issues that we were interested in, one very specifically, we are interested in the inheritance tax. And the spoiler alert is in the title that the inheritance tax remains in its current fashion. There were a couple bills addressing it, but none were passed. But our analysis and a cause that we will continue to support is that the inheritance tax currently is inequitable and helps limit the transfer of intergenerational wealth. Very specifically right now, the way the inheritance tax exceptions work is that it only ends up affecting people who maybe can't strategize around it or non-traditional families. So it really does affect a small set of people in a very inequitable way. So that is something that we are working on, but no laws were passed to actually change it. And then it was actually covered in our housing section, but there were a couple property tax credit related bills, which also heavily affect the ability of homeowners, our clients, to retain their properties by helping them save on their property tax bills. So I won't recover them because we just did that. So I'm going to pass off the mic.
All right, thanks, Stephen. And we're coming back to me for the last section, and I will give the caveat that I am not a family law attorney. I have gotten these updates from our family law attorney who couldn't be here today. So I'm going to share them with you, but I may have to, if anyone in the audience has any questions about any of them, I may have to connect you with her after the fact. So there were a number of kind of, I guess I'll say minor-ish family law updates that happened this session. There was a major overhaul, you might recall, of divorce law last year. And so the appetite for changing kind of things in the family law arena might have been a little bit smaller this year than general. But for MVLS as an organization, we get more requests for family law assistance than any other issue we serve, particularly child custody. It's the biggest area of need that we have, that our clients reach out to us for help. So, obviously family law is an issue that impacts many, many low-income Marylanders, and one that we do quite a bit of work on. The first update is really just about the authority to perform a marriage, just kind of an update that is in the family law arena, probably not of super significance to most of our cases at MVLS. The next section has to do with child support and who's required to pay child support in what circumstances. So in this case, incarceration is something that can be taken into account in regards to setting child support obligations. Obviously, people who are incarcerated cannot make money, are not employed, and so that does impact their ability to pay child support. And so that's something that the court is now taking into account when they're looking at child support obligations. And then I think, pass it back to Heather about this bill that Heather mentioned earlier regarding child labor trafficking in SINA cases.
Thanks, Margaret. Yeah, it's interesting. Maryland's playing a lot of catch up in terms of some of our human trafficking related laws. Interestingly, a lot of the focus in the state, and I think nationally as well, has been on sex trafficking. And interestingly, Maryland did not even have a state law outlawing labor trafficking until 2019. Just pause and think about that for a second. So there's kind of a lot of catching up, making sure that systems are in place, making sure that laws are aligned to make sure that survivors of both sex and labor trafficking are protected. And in addition to kind of catching up with all these laws, there's been some great new programming that's been put in place by the state. Most specifically, the implementation of what's called a regional navigator program. And that's a program that was enacted a number of years ago and started as a pilot project in a few counties, but now every county in the state has a human trafficking regional navigator, so that victims of trafficking are supposed to be able to kind of go to this navigator, specifically younger victims. It's the navigator's mandates, are broad, but they have a specific focus on working with minors and folks up to the age of 24. To ensure that they can get, really good case management, coordinated services, not be bouncing around from different service providers to be able to get help. And interestingly, when this program was set up, it wasn't explicitly including survivors of labor trafficking. There was a little questions about, how people could access support from the Regional Navigator program, and then also just how victims of labor trafficking that were minors might be viewed under other relevant state laws. And so what this bill did, again, it's kind of just organizing services, making sure people can access things as needed, making sure that minors are protected if they've experienced sex trafficking or labor trafficking, and ensuring that, for example, for minors, if they have been exploited via labor trafficking, that they can get all of the supports and services that would be available in a child in need of assistance case. Again, it's just kind of making all these fixes to ensure that people can get the services that they need, especially minors in the state. So, again, it's just it's interesting in our anti-trafficking world how we're pulling from all of these different areas. Whether it's family law, criminal record relief, we work with folks on consumer issues, on tax, to make sure we can get these types of holistic services for clients.
Thanks, Heather. There was another law related to SINA that had to do with kinship care. This has to do with if a child is taken from their biological parent, who they are placed with, and the preference that it be someone that is related to the child, or at least has some cultural connections to the child. But the purpose of this, I think, being keeping families together, even if not the biological family, but the extended family, and making sure that a child is not just placed into a setting where they have no connection whatsoever to to the individuals that they're placed with, which obviously be very traumatic and difficult for the child. So that was a law that passed this session. And there was another law that had to do with situations where the parents are in substance use disorder treatment, just establishing a presumption that the child can stay with the parent if possible, and that the residential facility that the parents at, try to set up the actual facility such that the parent can be with the child while the parent's receiving treatment. This is actually a call that we get with some degree of frequency in our custody program in terms of parents who are undergoing residential treatment and want access to their children. So this is definitely something that we see impacting our clients at MVLS. And there was a funding bill that is giving funding to domestic violence programs in the state. And so this is just another a bill that doesn't necessarily directly impact MVLS. As far as I am aware, we are not getting funding under this bill, but it's a resource for clients that we serve through other programs. Legislation that did not pass. You see a whole bunch here. And as I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of this has to do with the fact that we think a lot of it had to do with the fact that there were such broad scale changes in family law last year, and maybe the appetite was not there to make such broad changes again. But things having to do with how child custody is determined, the best interest of the child, and we can anticipate that some of these things might be back again next year. Finally, there was a special education related bill that passed, which does impact MVLS and our clients. We actually received funding under this bill to run a program kind of similar to our Judicare program, where we're able to provide low bono funding for attorneys who take on special education cases, such as IEP related cases. So we are working on building out that program. It is supposed to launch around October 1st, but this will be a new service that MVLS is able to provide. Actually, it's not a type of case that we handle right now, so we will be handling these cases and providing additional service to our clients. And we know this is a service that a lot of our clients need. So we are very excited to be taking on this new program. So with that, I'm going to let anyone who's in the audience kind of gather any questions that you have. I'm going to run through just a couple of quick slides about how to get involved with MVLS if you're not currently involved. And thank you again to our panelists and presenters today. So this is just a picture of our website. If you are interested in becoming a volunteer with us, you can click the button that the arrow is pointing to that says volunteer. And then you will fill out a volunteer application, which will just give us a little bit of information about you and what kind of cases you might be interested in taking. Once you fill out the volunteer application, you'll get an email from our pro bono program director, as well as a phone call from one of our staff members, just kind of checking in and seeing whether you have any questions about MVLS. At that point, you can take a case. And the way that you do that is by going on our pro bono portal, also a part of our website. It's pictured here. You can sort the cases by case type as well as county to kind of just pull up cases that you might be interested in. And you can see that there's a short little blurb here about every case that we offer. So you can get a sense of what the case is about, what deadlines are coming up. And if you hit learn more, that will generate an email to a member of our intake team who can help you with a conflicts check or answering any questions you might have about potentially accepting that case. So that's our pro bono portal. We have upcoming trainings. We try to run at least one or more trainings each month. In July, we have a training about navigating tax controversies that affect human trafficking survivors with two of my colleagues who are on this call will be involved in that one as well. So that should be a really interesting one, and we hope you might join us for it. And I'm also featuring here a recent training we had on the process for independent adoption, where we now have a recording on our website. So you may want to check that one out as well. And we have trainings in all of these different areas listed on the screen, which we would definitely encourage you to take a look at if you're interested. And so with that, I will leave you with our social media information, and I'm going to just go back over to my Zoom here and see if there are any questions. So please feel free to put any questions that you might have in the chat. Is there anything? I have like 1 or 2 questions, and we only have about 5 minutes left, but I'll pose one of them maybe for my fellow panelists. But do any of you have, I don't see any questions coming through in the chat at this moment. Do any of you have anything else you want to say, kind of having heard anything else you want to add before I kind of go into our couple of additional questions? No, hearing none. Okay, 1 second. I know, pulling up my questions. Okay, so this was touched on really briefly. I believe it was in Heather's portion, but would any of you like to speak to what the role of coalitions or partners is in MVLS's advocacy work?
I would be happy to share some stuff on that end.
Thanks, Chris.
From my experience, when we were working on expungement-related legislation, the concept of working with partners and working within coalitions is really, really important. We are really lucky to have a lot of really wonderful partners through the Workforce Development Project, and certainly throughout all of MVLS, but as to the ones I can speak to from my own experience with this project, we do rely quite a bit on other partners, other advocacy groups, other nonprofits. And through the Workforce Development Project, it's been really great to work outside of the legal field, to be honest. We do also work with legal aid and other legal services organizations, but getting perspective from people who are not lawyers and from people who advocate for others in their community, from people who advocate for themselves because they live with criminal records. This is extremely important to get that perspective, and it really informs our positions on the issues.
Thanks, Chris. Would any of our panelists be interested to speak on how has racial justice played into any of the bills that you spoke about? I think, we've touched on that a little bit. Oh, Stephen.
Yeah. So whatever the main pushes that we did on the clean lean sheet bill, we see that affects homeowners, especially Black homeowners who've already been at a disadvantage for developing intergenerational wealth. We see removing that last step and allowing a family to fully sort of utilize and realize that asset of the home that has been built up. We see that as really key part of the work that we do in stabilizing homeowners. So we talked about a clean lien sheet bill that would help people transfer these properties at the ends of estates, help them in general with these transfers, and just basically allow people to kind of continue to build that intergenerational wealth and pass it on to their family. And we see that as a key part of stabilizing homeowners who have already been disadvantaged, and we see it as part of the racial justice work that we do on the project.
Thank you. With that, I think I don't see any questions that have come in. I'm going to give one more big thank you to everybody for participating in this training, as well as to all of our volunteers and anyone else who might be on the line watching. We really appreciate all the work that you do in in helping our clients combat some of these issues that we've talked about here today. We are, I think, wrapping up, and so thank you for being a part of this training, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thanks, everybody. Bye.